Okay. Oh,
Oh,
it's weird.
Do you see the option?
Yeah, but it's not showing what I'm expecting. I'll just do a quick test.
We can see your desktop. Do you see the option?
That's my son's desktop. Can you see this now?
We do see, looks
yeah,
like
some Heckle drawings and yep.
Yeah, okay. Great, thanks. I have to go out of it for some reason, or else it starts. Okay.
Yeah, the floor is yours, Jonathan, as soon as you're
Oh, right. Oh,
ready.
okay. Okay. So ready as I'll ever be. So there we go. So this chapter is individuality and genus. There's only 8 portions, so let's get stuck in, get the boot in. So it starts by talking about freedom seems contradicted by the fact that we are. It's going a lot faster. I did actually test it so good. So it starts with the fact that our individuality seems contradicted by the fact that we're brought up in groups, like family groups, national groups, racial groups, etc., etc. So within all that, as it describes, it stamps us everybody's stamped by those various groups. How within that is individuality possible? So we got here the B's, we're all a member of a totality, and we're determined by that totality. The genus explains the forms in the individuality we observe. So he describes it that way. He says that the individuality that we observe of a person is formed by the genus rather than their individuality as such. These are Goetheanum bees. So groups, individuality subsumed in groups and determined by them. But perhaps the most, as in individuality, perhaps the most classic is that is to say that the generic in us, so this is around paragraph 4, about halfway, the generic in us is a medium in which we express ourselves. So all of the generic characteristics that stamp upon us don't inhibit our freedom in the sense that they provide a medium. And I've just got this picture of the medium of painting and light and form, color, form, light, through which something can be expressed. And then he comes to a very interesting part. Perhaps it's very interesting that it seems that it could be very sort of dated in the sense that he starts talking about the difference between men and women, and he's sort of addressing the equality question. When will women be granted the same freedoms that men are? And at first glance, that could seem very kind of like dated. Possibly, it's changed a lot since that time 100 years ago, or a bit more. And yet, when you think about it a bit more, you could say but that is the most kind of basic way in which we are defined separately from each other. So beyond that, if you get past all race, family, tribe, etc., we come to our bodies, and they're men or women. And behind that is the individuality. So this is like the major kind of generic differences that occur to us. And here we got an individuality coming to herself in a sense. I don't know, I like this picture. So there's just pictures of people now, because the rest of it is really talking about how then can we get to know another. And the only way he can, there's an individuality struggling against the generic. He suggests that the only way that we can really get to know another in their freedom, not as generic, we must stop our knowing. So normally we observe and then we bring concepts to our observations. But he's going to say when that's only going to bring us to everything that is, generic, the stamp upon us, even down to the form of our physical body. And the only way that we can get beyond that is, in a sense, we have to stop our knowing and somehow have our knowing become the knowing of the other. And that's a huge question for me. How exactly does one do that? There seems to be some sort of reversal from the usual state of things going on there. So he then goes on to talk about the frontier, where people are becoming as beings, where specific thinking cannot be deduced from general concepts. So our thinking normally brings us concepts which are general, and we need the observation, the perceptual, to give us the specifics. And he's saying here, at a frontier where people are not just generic, not just dependent on what they've been stamped into, and stamp in the sense of, like a printing press like thing. That specific thinking cannot deduce that our normal thinking cannot deduce the free becoming beings rather than generic beings. None of us are all genus, but none of us are all free. So we all have like a part and part of each. And the final paragraph, he ends by looking at, so what then is the what constitutes, apart from us copying others or obeying the commands, what is it that has ethical value? What is that? And he speaks about the moral life of mankind is essentially the sum total of the products of the moral imagination. And we can only gather that moral imagination, I think, is what he's saying, in as much as we can put down our perspective and our thought and be able to kind of invite in the thought of another. And then finally here, I just collected just 4 or 5 sort of phrases or sentences that really spoke to me. This is the first one. Oh, sorry. What is generic in us serves only as a medium to express what is individual. I really like that. Every single human being is a separate problem. They can't all be lumped into the same basket. And now this is me. This is my attempt to encapsulate that bit. That's not words from the text. And that is it. So I finished with It's a Rainy Day here, and it looks like it's going to be a bit of a rainy week. So there we go. And that's it. So over to all you guys.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a very short chapter, but so many crucial points. Obviously, that's the final proper chapter. I know there's one more section, but so much is culminating in this chapter. And in so many ways, it stands on its own for even those who haven't read through the entire book.
Good point.
You could read just this chapter and get a sense for the products of the labor we've been engaged in. So if you didn't want to go through the whole process, you could just deliver the product and okay, here it is. But this question of not being able to intuit the concept for another free individual, but to, as Steiner puts it, we must take over into our own spirit those concepts by which he or she determines him or herself. And I think this might be where knowledge or knowing has to pass the baton, as it were, to love or loving, right? To know another free being, we have to love them. And was it Rilke who said to love another human being is the most difficult task in the world? That this is the social task for free human beings. To live amongst one another, they must learn to love one another. And this isn't like a sentimental form of love. This is like letting the other in to ourselves. It's not easy. Because you might initially feel like there's quite a conflict here. If my freedom as an individual conflicts with your freedom as an individual, you know, Steiner says free beings can't really have a moral disagreement. And that could only mean that we're meeting each other in this loving embrace, as it were. But this is a very difficult kind of love. This isn't necessarily a feel-good kind of love.
Yeah, I just want to chip in quick because I feel it also has to involve deeds. Do you know what I mean? So it will involve being with the other in what they are doing, and doing something oneself. And so necessarily within that, there's always, I'm going to say it like this, maybe not the appropriate words, but a bit of trial and error.
Yeah. Anyone else want to chime in? Go ahead, Chad.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Jonathan and Matt. Yeah, it's a really good way to start. And I think I highlighted the same sentence that you read. With all other objects, the observer must get his concepts through his intuition. But if we are to understand the free individuality, we must take over into our own spirit those concepts by which he determines himself in their pure form without mixing our own conceptual content with them. And I struggle to really know if that's possible in any absolute way. I mean, he's basically saying we have to remove our own bias from our understanding, in our both our percepts and our concepts is the way I'm kind of reading that. But I felt like I could really sense the dated nature of the writing as well, like with the feminine masculine perspective or male female. But like when he says each individual, it's its own problem, for some reason I started thinking about Hitler and like his, describing the Jewish problem, or the way that was understood as the Jewish problem in Europe. And it does seem kind of rooted in this, like, what's the word? Physiognomy, like
Physiognomy,
like that, which is a very, I think, dated way of understanding, like races don't ultimately really exist, that he's kind of coming from this place that races, we act in a certain way because we're white or because we're black. I mean, but then I think he transcends that. It seems he's striving to transcend it in the chapter, but it's still kind of this residual background, I guess, for him at that time, clearly. But I guess with the male-female dichotomy, it made me think about how we can understand ourselves beyond gender, in the sense of we're both solar and masculine. That's where, I mean, solar masculine and lunar feminine, like the solar and lunar concepts are like archetypal natures of who we are, because we all are both solar and lunar. And there can be a solar masculine and a solar feminine, as well as a lunar masculine and a lunar feminine.
right? In particular, in German, the moon is considered masculine and the sun feminine. So there's a bit of gender bending going on there.
Very interesting. I
Yeah.
wasn't aware of that. Yeah, but I guess where, my question, I guess, arises is in that attempt to free ourselves from our own bias to know the other in a pure form. When you're saying love, I think we can also just say genuine, deep empathy is a form of love, right? That's when you're having a deeply empathetic communion with the other. It's a form of love where you're striving to know them from within their own perspective, without your perspective, your bias interfering. But ultimately, is that fully possible, I guess, is the question. I didn't want to take up any more time, so maybe other people have some ideas and we'll.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kate.
I like this chapter because we've been talking about coming to know, for example, plants in the way we have a relationship with human beings. Like we've had that as a thread throughout this whole group, this whole time. We've talked about coming to know things in the world in a similar way that we have a relationship to a person. And then you remember that each person is individual. You can come to know, you can come to know a type of animal or an insect or, a river or, and that, which is many things in one, but a human being is its own many things in one. So that's interesting that it's kind of, we've used that as an analogy for so long. And then we have to look at how in a human being, it's like the archetypal version of that, because each one is its own. Yeah, we always talk about it. Each person is its own species or its own phenomena that we come to know. And with the problem of, can we fully do that? I think thinking about the social threefolding is really helpful for that, because there is a place where you allow the human being to be its individual self and express itself as whoever that individual is through the medium of where they came to be in their body and their genus. And that's in the cultural sphere, where you allow the person to tell you who they are. And it's in the cultural sphere is also the head sphere, the thinking. Each person has their own individual ideas about themselves. So when you are engaging in that part of life, it's kind of makes sense to let the person be who they are. But it's not all of life, so we don't have to worry that we can't do it all the time, because there's also the sphere of rights where you say, yes, you are your own person, but so am I. I'm also my own person, and there are times when I need to allow myself, I can't just be empathetic all the time, because there is my heart that's keeping me alive, and that's my own system, and I can't just be an empathetic. I can't deny myself for you all the time. And then there is the economic sphere, which is the world of deeds and our metabolic limb system, where we say, okay, we're both free, we're both individual, and now we have to come to each other with our needs. We have to come to a midpoint. So it's interesting how the problem of this chapter kind of is setting us up for thinking about social threefolding, and how it's not just, this abstract, love your, it is love your neighbor, which is not an abstract thing, but it's not like a moral maxim. It's something that comes in life in different ways, and each time then in each sphere it will be represented differently and has a different way that we can go about that loving. As you as yourself, I want to know you, and me as me, and let's not blend those boundaries, and then how do we come together? I think that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It's I like, Kate, that you brought in the way that we know other objects in the world, whether minerals, plants, animals, that it's easier to know them by their type, by their genus, because while, each of us may know and love our particular dog or particular cat, there's a large degree to which they all, different breeds maybe are somewhat, they're different types, right? But that there's a larger degree to which their behavior is determined by that type. But I don't think this is, I don't know where Steiner would come down on this. I don't think it's a sharp division here that makes the human in our individual freedom as if in a different universe. There is a lesser degree of individuality in animals, despite the fact Steiner would say they have group souls and so on, but I don't know that we can say there's freedom in non-human animal forms, but there is some degree of capacity for individual expression, not individual freedom in the sense Steiner means, but I guess I resist the sharp line here. But this means that, just as Goethe would talk about his form of empiricism, studying plants as a gentle empiricism, that you have to really fall in love with the particular plant form that you're observing in order to know it. There's some degree to which this lesson to not think that we know a human being and a human individuality, because if we think we know another individual, we're in a sense restricting their freedom, because if they're free beings, they could decide to be otherwise than we think we've known them. And to a lesser degree, that's true of our pet dog, and that's true of any organism, I would think, right? To a lesser degree. I don't know what others think about that, but I guess I'm resisting any sharp divisions here. There's certainly a gradient, and that the human being is quite a difference, but not a division, let's say. Anyways, what do you think, Jeff?
I'm sort of thinking a little cluster of things. This chapter speaks to me quite a lot. What did you say, Matt? You could just read this chapter. You should have told us at the beginning. It could have been quicker, right? But there's a lot of really powerful ideas here. I guess the first thing is this whole idea of seeing and understanding who the other is, in their individuality, not in their generic form. That ties us back again to what we talked about earlier in chapter 9 of for our own ethical deed, that's done out of love, right? And this is the same thing we're talking about here, that loving our own deed is loving ourselves and loving our individuality, right? It's not, not loving that we're doing something generic, but or moral or out of form. But so there's that tie-in, our own individual love giving us our individual deed. Now we can give it to the other and start to know how to love them, right? That's kind of the same basis there. There's something you said as well, Matt. I forget exactly how you said it, but the idea of loving the other, and that's a difficulty, right? That's you don't just roll out of bed and just know how to do that every day. Like you kind of have to put the specific effort in each time. It reminds me too, in Kuhlwint, who's really taken off a lot, in these anthroposophical ideas, when he talks about the 12 senses, the highest sense, the sense of another's I being, right? I organization, is kind of what we're talking about here. He describes that as being a great difficulty, right? It's almost, I forget his exact language and wording, but it's basically the idea he gives is that when we come into contact with another, anytime through the day or any time, that it's, and we're generally not really awake to this, but this is true and this is happening, that it's a great challenge, right? It's a great challenge. It's like the way I think of it in my medical terms, it's like, this is how our immune system functions, right? Our immune system is being grounded in our own individuality. We're walking around, and when we confront another, this is kind of an immune response. Initially, we're like, oh, this is a foreign object. What am I going to do, right? A foreign person. But yeah, this whole act of love, everything we're talking about, is kind of where in that moment we can overcome that immune defense, if we want to call it that, So there's all of that. And yeah, I guess another general thought I have within all this, I relate very much to the message of this chapter, because I think about this all the time in my whole medical context, the relationship of the generic and the individual. The vast majority of what we need to do in medicine is generic, right? There's various, I don't have to give all the examples, but there's all these levels of typological things that we deal with at a medical level. And that's great. That's what people need, medically speaking. That's how people improve their health. But there's always at least a little fragment of awareness, of the patient's individuality, which sooner or later fully blossoms into the heart of the whole therapeutic process. But it's, and a lot of people, if they hear this, they kind of don't like it. It's everyone wants to be treated as an individual, and I'm not a type, and this, all these kinds of feelings. But as I say, for the medical purposes, we kind of have to get over ourselves in that way and deal with all the generic stuff, so that we can clear the way to get, therapeutically speaking, get into that highest form of dealing with what the individual is really about, and kind of what they need to, how to bring that into the world or whatever. Anyway, that's a big constant thought in my life. So these are just sort of the range of thoughts I have around this chapter. And yeah, we've already kind of got off to a great series of conversations here that I'm really enjoying. So.
Helpful example there with the medical context, Jeff. Thanks. How about the other Jeff? What are you thinking?
Well, I promise I'm not going to cry this time.
It's okay if you do.
Okay. So I want to come back to this point of whether it's possible to know another. And I have an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I can tell you it's possible. I might cry actually now. It is possible, and it's also impossible with the state of consciousness that we have at this point in history. So in a sense, children aren't as complex as adults, but you also get to watch them first overcome their fixed hereditary traits. Then you get to watch them sort of begin to unfold in more imaginal kind of ways, and then you get to watch them, and you can watch it. It's like Goethe watching the metamorphosis of a plant. It's like it's a strange experience. It's a little bit like time absolutely screams by, yet you see every single intermediary stage, and though it's not through concepts, right? So I don't have to put myself to sleep to wake up with their perspective, in the sense of their sharing a perspective, but their perspectives are innately wise, and so there's a wisdom that wakes up in me because I'm a parent. I mean, it's just an amazing initiatory experience on some level. As far as race and gender and these other notions, family, state, I don't really have objection to the language here. I think that we are of our place to some degree. So we are. I'm Midwestern United States American. I mean, that is a breed of people. I'm telling you, that is a formative group and to deal with, and and now I live in the South, and there are deep regional influences, right? And so out of that, we individuate, right? Out of that, we get Faulkner in the from the deep South, and we get I don't know. I won't go into a bunch of examples, but what he provides for is that we individuate as a species, as I've mentioned before, and what other way are we to overcome our separateness from nature if we don't do it with each other? Because there is no better likeness than the other that is a human being. And so I just think he's saying, when I listen to another human being or watch their gestures, that I let them wake up in me. I just quiet what I have to say and think. And it's not really that difficult, actually, especially when we really offer it to each other, when we really give the gift of ourselves and really unfold ourselves. It's like a social responsibility in this threefold social organism to allow for the cultural, spiritual aspect to be cultivated through education and through mediums like this. This has been an outstanding revelation of the concepts in this book, in a way, because of the work we've done together. Yeah, I think that's what I have to say at this point.
Thank you, Jeff. Just a brief comment about what you reminded me of Fichte and his understanding of what he calls the summons of other free self-consciousnesses, that in some way he's caricatured as a solipsist sometimes, that he thinks it's all about his ego, which is totally incorrect. He's really talking about the way in which, to become a free ego, you need to be recognized by other free egos. And so this process of recognition, maybe cognition isn't quite the right word, in the sense that Steiner is saying we can't apply our own concepts to know other people. We have to let their concepts into us. And so it's a kind of recursive recognition, maybe, where I'm knowing the other because I'm letting them know themselves in me, as it were, and vice versa.
Yeah, we are the soil for each other. Mm-hmm. So a plant can exist without the full context of what it's rooted in and the medium in which it lives. And the social medium is our medium that we live and breathe. Beautiful. Thank you for that.
Beautiful. Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm going to talk a bit slower today because I'm going through a flu or something similar, and I hope you can hear me well. But I was sort of thinking about this relationship between being an individual and going through the process of individuation. And there's a bit of a sharp line, I think, when Steiner writes here that a person has emancipated himself from all that is generic, or when only to the extent that a person has emancipated himself from all that is generic does he count as a free spirit. So what I was thinking is, if I look into my own life, I free myself from certain generic structures and feel myself free in them, but only to arrive into other generic structures and having to learn about them and appropriate them and become them, and eventually becoming free in them or through them again, in order to free myself into a new generic, free myself from those generic structures into something new. So in a way, it was just this relationship that I feel the free spirit is always present. It can't be, at least potentially, it can't be that impossibly far away as it feels in this quote. And also I'm thinking about someone, it was Jeff that spoke about the 12 senses, but also these 7-year periods. I don't remember exactly where, but it's in later life that Steiner speaks that the individual's free task upon this life becomes to manifest, arises into him. So I think this also relates to one's own process of individuation and yes, a sort of metamorphosis of the free spirit at play. So those was my thoughts.
Thanks, Alex. It makes me, I mean, the comment Steiner makes about what is generic in us serves as a medium. It makes me feel, or it makes me think of the way in which every artist needs a medium to express themselves, right? And so if there were, Steiner says, he seems to draw a sharp line in the quote that you shared with us, that we must be totally free of what is generic in us, but other times he says that no individual is all individual or all genus, no, right? But the truly creative artists are quite, they do unexpected things. And, you know, I think of Joseph Beuys, for example, and in some cases, his medium is a hotel room, a coyote, and a thick blanket. And it's like, okay, here we go. He's not just working with clay or paint or whatever. And so what counts as the medium for a human being is pretty open-ended. What do you think, Ashton?
Well, I think this is really key to this claim that he makes, where he's saying that if we really want to know or aspire to get to know the free spirit of another, that we must cease to call to aid any concepts at all of our own. And so he says, just as the free individuality emancipates himself from the characteristics of the genus, so must the act of knowing emancipate itself from the way in which we understand what is generic. And then on the page before, he says, the conceptual content which man has to connect with the percept by an act of thinking in order to have the full reality cannot be fixed once and for all and bequeathed ready-made to mankind. And I think that I guess the significance of the generic for each of us as individuals is relevant to this, because, you know, we can't impose our concepts if we really seek to know another individual, because they've you know, I don't want to say fought their way or won their way through to intuitions through their own generic or situated context. And so we can't just, we would be distorting or just not seeing the other person if we were to impose. And I think this is significant, you know, as Jeff was saying, like when it comes to cultures and peoples and, you know, different religious historical contexts, different embodied experiences. And how, you know, if we like broaden to like think in the larger anthroposophical worldview, you can think about how important the generic is in a karmic sense. If we are kind of like as free spirits artists in a kind of moral cosmic creation, that there's probably, you know, very specific, concrete, aspects of our generic existence that we need in order to evolve.
Yeah, definitely. That resonates, Ashton. And you know, I think this first edition, right? It's written and published in the 1890s, and I don't know exactly the situation in Europe in terms of women's rights, but you know, women didn't get the right to vote in the U.S. until 1920, and didn't get other economic freedoms until, like, was it the 60s or 70s that women could use credit cards and so on. So Steiner's quite ahead of his time on that one. And I just am thinking again about what Chad was bringing up in terms of race and how we think about race today versus in Steiner's time. It's unfortunate that almost every evolutionary thinker, biological thinker, in Steiner's time, from the time he died back through most of the 19th century, was in Europe and America, they were just casual white supremacists. I mean, that's just how it was. And race was understood as a biological category. I mean, look at Haeckel on this, for example. Steiner did not see race as a biological category, though. He inherits some of Theosophy's sense of root races in the past. But I think in the present phase of human evolution, he's very clear that while there are certain generic characteristics that are, whether regional or at the level of phenotype, and biologists nowadays would say, genetically speaking, there's more diversity within what we might call a racial group than between them oftentimes. And so it doesn't really work as a biological classification anymore for current science, while it was the standard 100 years ago. And so things have definitely shifted, but I think Steiner's point of view here about how we can't escape what's generic in us, but we can use it as a medium to express our own free individuality, I think is still very much relevant. And so in other words, each of us in our unique situations, regionally, with our ancestry, with our cultural inheritance, has a unique medium to use to express our individuality. There's no generic individuality, right? So freedom looks different in each of us, in other words. That's how I would put it. Is your hand going back up, Jeff? Yeah.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, this is dicey a little bit if you start to work with it, because there's a lot of, I would say, unwarranted criticism of Steiner as a racist, actually, specifically. And it's a careful, it needs careful consideration, probably out of the scope of this conversation, but his cosmology, say, or his, it would include a cosmology, I would say, really lands at the doorstep of modernity in a certain sense, as the after effects of profound evolutionary processes that biologists have no clue about as relates to evolutionary biology. And so, I mean, a clue maybe. So I want to set that aside and just say that I'm glad that you brought that he didn't have a biological idea of race, though there are biological artifacts of previous times when people lived in different places and were profoundly influenced by the place in which they live. And I joked about Midwesterners and Southerners, but it is also a factor in a very complex set of factors. And also this, I'm glad also that you brought up the feminist move that he makes here. You know, that he maybe the first wave feminism, the 0.0 wave feminism. But that was a ballsy statement to make at that time in his culture, and to put it in a work of philosophy shows the seriousness with which he thinks that this process of becoming free is existentially relevant to, I would say, something like humanity's survival. If we are to overcome the existential risks of our time, we can't devolve back into tribalism, right? And so, so I would just suggest this is a kind of heroic move in this chapter.
Yeah. Agreed. And you know, Kate brought in social threefolding here, and looking at the 20th century and the world wars and the seeming inability we still have for running headlong into another one. The issue of the nation state, nation-state, where the US is quite unique in this sense. Europe is becoming more like the US in the sense that there's a lot of immigration that's breaking up what might be thought of as the national identity, the sense of a shared ethnic inheritance. But in threefolding, like the cultural aspect and the political aspect get differentiated. And so the idea of a nation state as one entity, which I think there's plenty of historical evidence tends to lead to more violence and competition, unnecessary competition between peoples. If we can disaggregate the nation, that aspect which has more to do with ethnicity from state, which has more to do with political equality, I think we could help resolve some of these the pathway towards war that continues to threaten modern societies. And it has a lot to do with the political realm and the sort of social feeling that's necessary to meet each other as equals, regardless of generic characteristics, while having the cultural realm to celebrate differences. In the political realm, we recognize equal rights, right? And so it's by differentiating these things, I think we're less likely to run into some of these conflicts. But Lorenzo, please.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. I'm not sure I'll be able to express what I'm trying to, what I'm thinking. Well, I'll try. We said before that everything that is not individual to man, it's not just his own, but it's part of genus, race, and so on, is the medium that he or she uses to express their individuality. Okay, I would like to point out that this probably has to do with the separation of a new body, because we know that freedom and individuality in the highest sense, that is the individuality of the I, is something that has just begun in our evolution. Is like a new phase we are in, and so it's like we are developing a new organ or a new body that has to grow. And so I was thinking that the fact that we have to use what is not just ours, but is common as a medium, can be seen as, I mean, the concept of medium can also be seen as the concept of background or ambient or habitat, so that inside this medium, this habitat, something separates itself, and this might well be the literally the separation of a new organ from this medium. That's sort of what I wanted to say. I'm not able to really express it properly. Sorry.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I'll sit with that one. Let's move along to Daniel. Go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Let's see. So the thought I was having was the fact that in order to really encounter another person, and in that encounter we rise together in being in our individual freedoms, but that we have this bias that might come from the genus, or that there's almost like this eclipse or hooded quality, and that we need to deal with or see that we have a bias in order to kind of clean it out, in order to have space for the other one to enter. So I was going into this idea of the age-old idea of hospitality, of host and guest, that we actually have to clean our house in order for the other to come in. And that this process, that process itself to get ready for the encounter, is creating our individuality too, because I think part of this new organ you were just talking about, Lorenzo, is maybe this capacity to see that we have an inside and the other one has an inside, and that these insides can give space to each other and create new dimensions and dynamisms within it. So I just saw this movement as go within in order to encounter the other, as a sort of purifying or clearing out process. The other thought I had was, I think from the original picture, you have this idea that we're trying to have a persona or a mask that's really in our social sphere, like that's almost the way in which we're different. At the primitive version of making things different has a weaponization to it. Like it comes out of fear of like, oops, I'm scared about you. You might demolish me. So we put up this mask. And if we go, but we have to go further in that separation to be individuated through love, not fear. So anyways, we think we're individuals underneath our mask, but underneath our individuals, we're a genus. And I was just kind of positing that we might have a deeper level of individuality, like the I, that our little I is sort of echoing, and that all of this depth, in order for us to see each other at this individualized depth, happens through the steadiness of our attention. I think a lot of what we think about comes from the genus and comes from, like we say, this concepts. And that if we just hold to attention and hold space, that this deeper individuality comes up, and it's from a different place of where we traffic in concepts. So I hope that was clear, but thank you.
Yeah, really helpful, Daniel. It makes me think, if this is implicit in what you're saying, it'll help me clarify that basically there's a kind of unfree sympathy or antipathy we might have for others that's at the level of what's generic. I have sympathy for the generic things in other people that are similar to my own, and antipathy for those that are not. But this is an unfree sort of reaction, and that a free reaction would go beyond that to what's individual, and not only in myself, but through that to what's individual, making room for what's individual in the other. Yeah. Jeff.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that was beautiful, Lorenzo. I think you did it, man. I think that was good. The notion of the organ puts us in history in a certain sense, in the way in which you did that. So we are developing an organ. It's probably something like the sense of otherness or the of I-ness, and you can't do it without the medium. And I think here of McLuhan's "the medium is the message," and we've got it. Our culture, I would suggest, has it backwards. That the message is the medium, and everything is just medium. And if everything's just medium, how do you discern one uniquely imprinting individual within that medium, so that it's a recognizable thing? I mean, you can't. There's just no love without having the medium. It's where the story is written, and the medium is the soul, really. I mean, this is back from riddles of philosophy, and the evolution of the soul. And what you're talking about is some organ in the soul, I believe, Lorenzo, is that this is that this is an actual evolutionary moment that you just described, and that's really, really important.
Yeah. It's we're undergoing a sort of topological inwardization, the whole world turning itself inside out in each one of us in some sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what are ideologies if not messages as mediums, as opposed to the medium as the message? So if the medium is the message, then every ideology is a symptomological gesture of something. And in our case, I think it's a simple symptomological gesture of the religification of empiricism, say, because everything as it appears to be, and it's only that. It's only everything as it appears to be. Language is a construct. Everything is a social construct. Everything can be instrumentalized in science. So in fact, in science, we have no message. We only have medium. Everything is mediated by models and models and instrumentation, literal instrumentation. This is why I argue for the extension of this word instrumental, that it's not just a function of philosophy. It's actualized in a culture that depends so much on its technologies to mediate experience. So those are instruments, and we become, what does McLuhan say? We become servo mechanisms for that medium. And if we're not getting more free, we're getting less free in that case.
Every new medium is an amputation of one of our senses. Social media certainly does everything to encourage us to treat one another as reducible to our generic characteristics as well. And there's all this talk of retribalization. I mean, McLuhan called that too, the global village. But it really is a retribalization. People talk about mimetic tribes and all of these ways that we're rushing away from individual freedom back into the safety of group identity. So we got a few minutes left here, but I just want to note that after we stop the YouTube recording, Ashton and I want to make a proposal for our group. So keep that in mind and don't hang up right after the call.
I was really interested in what Kate wrote in the chat. I think it can also be helpful to think of pain as the generic part of the shared human experience. And I'm struggling to take hold of that. What it did do is it brought to mind Hartman's view, and I'm wondering how that relates to this as our kind of a mission on humanity to resolve a pain in God, what is before us, so to speak. I'm wondering if that was what Kate meant. Perhaps someone.
May I? I think this relates to what Lorenzo was saying, actually, in that for every new sensory organ, let's say, sensory organs are developed through wounds, and the wounds are the apertures through which we perceive. We develop new leveling up of perception.
You could, I just think about this in connection with the way that, the age of the consciousness soul is described, especially like in the, after Nietzsche and the 20th century, and this intensifying experience of alienation. And, so there's different kinds of pain, but especially as regards like this development of a new organ through a certain kind of pain, an organ maybe to open back out onto the spirit world, but with this sort of individuated free spirit. But yeah, that really, I think what Kate mentioned especially highlights the ethical, that ethical aspect in our, what Steiner's saying here about how we really ought to comport to other individuals, rather than like imposing our concepts on them, just how we're all struggling, with our cultural, historical inheritance, but also, our own individual, morphology of lifetimes.
Yeah. So I'm actually getting a text message from another faculty member trying to use the Zoom account, which they should